So here were the limitations. One is they had to use Rudolph, obviously. Okay. They also had to use their creative discipline. So whatever it is that they do as a creative person, we contacted them and said, hey, can you do that thing for us? And most of them said yes. Some said no. We'll get them next year. The other limitations are they had their presentation is divided into 2 parts. The first 10 slides is the story. So this whole thing is not the Rudolph story, it's just the first 10 slides. The second 10 slides are their process. So they're going to tell you how they solved this problem, which is the part that I was most excited about, because as a teacher I really like seeing students work through a problem, and I think as creative people you are going to learn quite a bit from seeing how these people solved this problem. It also gave them only half of the time to make something, so they were more likely to say yes. So the Rudolph story is 3.5 minutes, and then the whole thing is 6 minutes and 40 seconds. The last limitations are, they had 4 slides that they had to cover. The first one is a title slide. The 4th slide had to have Santa on it. The 7th slide had to have all the other reindeer, and the 10th slide has to have Rudolph and his nose shining. So that's what we told them. All 10 of these presentations came together sort of on their own, and they're all brilliant. I'm just really excited about what's about to happen. So, did I cover everything, Jake? Bingo. Yeah, Jake says bingo. Okay. Okay, up next is Cheryl Dyer. Cheryl Dyer is a calligrapher. I'm going to tell you an interesting story about Cheryl. So, I used to be a designer. Not kind of stuff. The first year that I was designing, I designed a letterhead that was, I would give it a good. It was okay. But we asked Cheryl to hand letter it because we wanted to look like it was filled out, and that was sort of part of the shtick of the letterhead was having someone write rather than type everything. And it got some awards, and I am convinced it was only because Cheryl did the lettering for it and not because the design was very good. So Cheryl, thank you for that. I don't think I've ever thanked you for that. But she gets all of the credit for that. Cheryl has been a lettering artist for 10 years. She believes that calligraphy is a fine art that blurs the line of medium and subject matter. She works in the realm of words. Cheryl Dyer.
More about Rudolph in the last 3 weeks than I ever have in my entire life. And I discovered that in this story of Rudolph, it has all the elements that any red-blooded American wants from a good story. It has the Band of Brothers theme. You have your lone hero, Rudolph, of course, striving against the elements, a kind of character who by luck and pluck rises to fame and success, kind of like one of Horatio Alger's Boys with Antlers. This story appeals to all Americans, but also I think to a smaller group of people who closely identify with him, creatives. I work with words as a calligrapher all the time, and I decided to boil down this story and retell it into 8 individual words. So here goes. Anomaly. Our dear Rudolph is the hero of the story. He was born an anomaly with his glowing red nose, really diverging what was considered normal or expected from a young reindeer, really throwing people for a loop. Poor Rudolph. Just because there's a part of him that stands out is a little unique, Rudolph is ridiculed and rejected by his dad, his future employer, and his bossy and quite sexist, actually, coach. We identify with having bad dads, jerk Santas, and bully coaches in our own life. Rudolph is implored to do this next: conform and fit in. Cover up his embarrassing nose, play the part of one of Santa's company men, or deer. This is what we're told to do too, but what really, truly innovative ideas or art or discoveries ever come forth from people who cover up their nose? This next part of the story is where Rudolph finally gets cut a break. Sympathy and acceptance from dear Clarice, even a little sexual tension to make it juicier. Camaraderie from other misfits, folks like Herbie, who's willing to be honest with himself and what he's passionate about, dentistry. And who is surprised when this strikes again? our boy Rudolph faces his share. A monster with big teeth and weird eyes out tracking him. Storms, loneliness, and the nagging memory that back at home, those people have rejected him. Bootstraps is the next word. After going through what seems like a very quick on-screen puberty, Rudolph grows a pair of antlers and decides that he's had enough of his nomadic life. This self-made deer, he pulls himself up by his own bootstraps to improve his situation, heads back to Christmas Town to face his past, himself, and those demeaning father figures that he's left behind. And of course, I couldn't leave out my kid's favorite part. You know the part, when the bumble monster gets his comeuppance finally and his teeth pulled out. And isn't edentate a great word? I just learned it. It means a mammal with no teeth. Finally, in good Aesop form, we come to the moral of our story, and I have to admit, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. Yeah, Rudolph totally gets his joyful welcome home, but not because the people of Christmas Town have learned to appreciate variety among its reindeer. Instead, it's because he's just become useful. Rudolph was celebrated because mostly he was a bioluminescent headlight for Santa's sleigh. As I mentioned before, I wanted to retell Rudolph's story focusing on individual words because that's what I do in my work life. Unlike an author, my focus with words is visual. And this often explains why I misspell things, and I really had to up my game with proofreading. This was a job I recently did. An interesting thing about calligraphy blurs it blurs the lines between medium and subject matter. Another artist's media of choice might be gouache and sumi ink, and mine includes those materials, but unlike these, it also includes the marks themselves. I use calligraphic marks to make things, sometimes words and sometimes not. This is from a piece that I did last summer. Calligraphy, really at its essence, has nothing to do with words and letters. It's all about mark making. Some calligraphic marks on their own are fully charged with enough meaning and beauty that they need not be readable at all. This is a piece I like from a French calligrapher named Sophie Verbeek. No words. Hand lettering, on the other hand, is all about letter form, pushing the limits while working within the constraints of the letter. And I love working with constraints, but I found out that Joe loves them more than I do because there were a lot in this project. Take, for instance, appalling. Not only did we have the constraint of putting Santa in the slide, which I did with sumi ink on newsprint, I also wanted the word in a word bubble, really driving home the point that Santa said some nasty things in the movie. The lettering style for appalling came from some sketching I was doing on a yellow pad one day while I was on the phone, and I really decided I liked the elongated monoline, and I think that the caps communicated the tone of the voice, I imagine. Plus, I think an imperfect kind of hand-done feel looks more like a verbal human voice to me. Initially, I had planned for my last slide of the story to be the word useful superimposed on that trophy image, sort of giving a nod to the fact that the folks of Christmastown had no greater thing to say, or no greater praise for Rudolph than being useful. However, try as I might, I could not get my slides worked out to include that image and have the required image of Rudolph's nose in slide 10, so I ended up switching to this one. Lettering inside shapes, a round nose in this case, is kind of fun for me. And lastly, I wanted to include a slide of some of the tools I use for words that you saw tonight. In the upper left-hand corner is a ruling pen designed especially for calligraphers. I use this to write edentate. And below the ruling pen is an oblique holder with a pointed pen nib that I use to letter conform. And there's some various brushes and some chisel edge nibs up there. Thanks so much for allowing me not to just briefly retell the Rudolph story, but also to share with you tonight about what I'm passionate about, not dentistry like Herbie, but calligraphy and hand lettering. Thank you so much.